Happy morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Romanus Raymond. I play the role of heading the technical support at ManageEngine. I run customer support and product evangelization for Desktop Central, ManageEngine's unified endpoint management offering. And I have just completed 20 years with the device management team here at ManageEngine. So it's been so interesting, so exciting. So learning from the customers about the requirements, passing on to the development team, and from there, delivering the developed product and deploying to the customer's environment. So much of learning, fun. Thanks, ManageEngine, for that. And I'm also so excited to say that Zoho Corp, our parent company, has completed 25 years in business and going strong. You must be familiar with Zoho.com, our arm that makes SaaS apps for the business collaboration and productivity. And at ManageEngine, we focus on building enterprise IT management solutions. We are beyond grateful to our customers, employees, and partners for their unwavering trust and support. We thank you for being a part of our journey. And I'm also honored to have with me today Andrew Hewitt, Primary Analyst for Unified Endpoint Management at Forrester Research. Before we get started, let me quickly cover a couple of housekeeping details. We'll have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of today's discussion, and I invite you to submit your questions at any time during the webinar via the webinar interface. I once again welcome and thank everybody for joining us today. Thanks, Andrew, for joining us. We are so excited to have you here today. We know that you have done a lot of research at Forrester and have helped many customers in the area of digital workspace, especially as enterprise mobility, traditional client management, unified endpoint management, virtual desktop infrastructure, end user experience management, bring your own device, and device as a service. So today's session, we will discuss about the major trends within the device management and security landscape, the key approaches to endpoint management with real-time use cases, the convergence of endpoint management and security and the benefits of the trends, and best practices and tips for charting your 2021 endpoint management from customer's point of view. Thanks again for joining us, and I'll hand over it to Andrew. It's all yours, Andrew.
Awesome. Thank you, Romanus. And first off, I want to say congratulations to you for 20 years. That is an amazing feat, and congratulations to the Zoho team for 25 years. Thanks so much for having me on today. I'm really excited to be here talking about some of my research. As you mentioned up front, I lead our end user computing research here at Forrester, devices, apps, unified endpoint management, VDI, but I also lead some of our remote work research as well from a technology perspective. So we'll walk through some of the most recent findings that we've had with regard to UEM and security and remote workers. And we'll try to make this conversational throughout as well. Romanus will be jumping in with some conversations during the slides as well. So hopefully it'll be a nice engaging experience for you all today. So with that, why don't we just dive in here? So our official prediction here at Forrester is that we will witness a 300% permanent increase in full-time remote workers. In the United States, for example, the average rate is about 7% of workers are full-time remote workers. We anticipate that is going to stay and settle around 21%. So essentially 1 in 5 workers. And we see similar trends across the globe, about a 300%, whether you're looking in EMEA, whether you're looking in APAC, we do see a similar approach across a lot of different geographies, and that's going to have a huge ramification for how we start to think about the modernization of both endpoint management and endpoint security. So just to frame things up a little bit, this problem, this challenge that we've all been going through for the past 12, a little over 12 months now, is not going to go away anytime soon. So we're going to have to completely change our model to really deal with this increased remote workforce. So We know from the beginning, and this was a survey that we did, part of our priorities and journeys survey. We conduct this every single year, and last year we did it twice. So usually we just do it at the beginning of January to see what people's priorities are. This year we fielded it again in the April-May timeframe to see how had those priorities changed. And when we looked at preparedness for remote work, less than half of IT leaders out there said their infrastructure was actually prepared to handle a heavy remote employee base. And we saw a lot of challenges up front with supporting the remote workforce, whether it was patching of remote endpoints, discovering unmanaged endpoints that might be on your network, bringing those endpoints into compliance. Obviously later on down the road, issues with different cyber attacks and so forth that occurred at the end of last year. And so what we found was that a lot of organizations weren't necessarily prepared to handle this new topology of managing a remote workforce going forward. And that is going to be one of the fundamental shifts that you'll see over the next couple of years as organizations realize that they can no longer just protect their data in traditional ways inside the data center. That data is going everywhere. And so to deal with that, you need to modernize your endpoint management and security strategy to really enable that remote workforce. So at the same time of all this, 51%, this is also part of that priorities and journey survey, their organization had experienced decreased revenue. So you have this double problem here of, one, I need to modernize, but two, I also have to be budget conscious. And so what you'll see throughout the rest of the presentation too is more of a focus on things like automation to ensure that we can keep those costs low. There have been a large oil and gas company, for instance, that is using Windows Autopilot as part of their device management strategies to significantly reduce their device refresh cost. And so you need to both improve and modernize, but also do it in a cost-effective way, which becomes a huge challenge for a lot of organizations. And one of the major reasons why they're looking at this concept of unified endpoint management and security convergence happening at the same time. And then finally here, this has some ramifications for the employee as well, which is 34% of the employees, this is from our workforce survey of global information workers, so these are actual people working at organizations, just 34% of them said their company does a good job of supporting and engaging remotely located employees. Now, some of that is non-IT related things like culture and manager support and so forth, but a lot of it is actually the technology. And what we found consistently, and we'll dig into this a little bit later, is that technology is really one of the key drivers of employee experience. So not only do you need to manage and patch your endpoints and have really good endpoint hygiene, as well as good security around that, not only do you need to do that at a low cost, but you also have to make sure that the experience is really good. So these three things together, management, security, and employee experience, should really be your top three priorities as you go build your vision and strategy for the coming year. So let's take a quick little break there and just discuss kind of this overall trend here. Romanis, I'm really interested in your perspective here. What have you seen with regard to some of these trends that we've been talking about? Oh, looks like you're on mute. The number one challenge of remote working.
Yes. So I could see that what you are saying in terms of statistics is witnessed here in real time, right? So let me take the remote work first. So I always refer this as exodus of endpoints. So the journey through the hostile conditions, right? It started from work in office within a secured perimeter. From there, it moved to work from home, and then coming back. So a lot of our customers had a need to provide local admins while they are at home, because they have a lot of challenges in administering them. Now, when they're coming back to office, they had a greater challenge. Now, one of the challenge what I would like to put forward is basically the patching, right? So organizations they're struggling to push large sized patches to their endpoints, right? And that's where we had the peer-to-peer kind of solution from Microsoft. We exactly did the same with our customers, where we kind of call it as bring your own internet, right? Mm-hmm. Instead of taking the updates from the corporate office, they are going to download it from the peer. And the server will ensure that the patches are up to date, integrated. I mean, the integrity is checked and it is deployed. Similarly, when such endpoints from the remote work come back to office, you have a greater challenge of employees having their own updates or their own applications running there. So we cannot have them allowed in the production network. In such cases, not all customers had the network access control. See, that could prevent such things. But what we have done is we have enabled the network access control at the endpoint level. So as soon as it enters into the network, it will report itself to the server, ensure that it is up to the organization policy, patching, and updates level, and then move to the production. So this is something that we have seen, we have done in terms of remote work, as not all the organizations were ready with access control, things like that. And as you said rightly, there is more towards the cross-platform support because they had Windows from the legacy version to the latest Windows 10, Mac, Linux, iOS. So firms were forced to manage those things and patch so that the endpoints are secure. With respect to the infrastructure readiness, we could see there is more tendency towards cloud. People want to move towards cloud so that the management of the endpoints becomes easier, particularly during this pandemic and post-pandemic. And the last point I would like to mention is about your autopilot. Yes, more organizations were moving towards autopilot. However, there were organizations which have yet to adapt Azure ID or Intune. So what they did is basically they have to have a solution from the comfort of working from home. So what we did is we have traditionally empowering such customers with our own solution that would help them to provision and re-provision their endpoints, right? So this ensured that their endpoints are managed with the traditional solution what we have, similar to autopilot, those who are yet to adapt the Azure AD and Intune. So that's what we find the similarity and gap where we could actually fill those customers. And this brings one more question to me. So because everything is out in the wild at the endpoints. Now, the endpoints, productivity versus security, is this going to be a trade-off, or how do you see this?
It's a really great question. I think you brought up a lot of really great points there as well. And I'll try to touch on some of those elements around cloud and kind of the maturity of the different tool sets and so forth. But yeah, I think your fundamental question is totally sound. I mean, we hear this from clients all the time. I need to manage EX, I need to manage the endpoint, and I need to make sure security is really good. And is it possible to also do that while reducing my costs? And my answer to that is yes. And that's really thinking about how do I start to modernize and embrace some of those concepts like automation, cloud, and how do I do that at a pace that's very comfortable, for me, not just kind of jumping into a cloud tool, but being able to leverage some, tools that I already am familiar with and processes I'm already familiar with, while also starting to experiment with cloud going in the future. So I'll talk a little bit in the next couple slides about this concept of modern management and what do we mean by that, and how does that improve the overall employee experience while also your manageability and your security components too. So when we talk about unified endpoint management and security strategy, the first thing to note that this is all focused on the end user experience, right? You make a move to embrace modern management or a modern security strategy because one, it can unlock more time for you to focus on those employee experience elements, making sure that user experience is really good. And in a lot of cases, the experience itself is a lighter weight, more performing type of experience for folks as they go forward. And so not everybody is going to get to modern management now. I would say we've seen modest increases in that over the course of the pandemic. The folks that had increased their investment in technology over the past year, and there was only about 30-35% of organizations that did that. The number one area they looked at, number 1 and 2, cloud infrastructure and mobility. And so this is starting to happen. It's definitely not the most common way of managing endpoints right now, at least for a Windows environment. For smartphones and so forth, that's a different story. But when we talk about modern management and endpoint management together, there's a couple of key tenets that you want to sort of think about. One is this unification concept, so unified across all operating systems. You had mentioned them, Romanis, but there's a ton of ones that are coming up more frequently. It's not just Windows, it's not just iOS and Android, but it's Chrome OS, it's Linux, it's all sorts of particular rugged devices and so forth that are even smart glasses, wearables. All of those are coming as part of this unified strategy. It is cloud driven, right? And like I said, this is a journey to get there. But the idea is to manage these endpoints over the air using the internet when those endpoints are going to be outside of that corporate network and the data is going to be there as well. So we need to kind of think about how do we do patching in a very distributed way in such a way that it doesn't throttle all the bandwidth for someone that might be working at home. And so the cloud-driven processes do help, but you're absolutely right that there are some areas where that needs to improve. When it comes to Win32 application distribution, for example, a little bit tougher to do over the internet than kind of a traditional application packaging format. Self-service enabled is one of the areas that helps with some of this. So a lot of this modern management is also combining an enterprise app store or something like that that allows people to go and get these apps themselves. Contextually aware, now this is where security really comes into play here. And you talked about it a little bit too with kind of the changing network access controls based off of where people are. And people will be returning to the office. In fact, Forrester has said 60% of organizations will be hybrid organizations, 30% will be office-based, and 10% will be fully anywhere working organizations. This idea of being able to switch based off of the conditions that employee is facing to up-level the security or to decrease the need for multiple factors of authentication, et cetera, depending on various conditions, is a huge component of modern management going forward, and frankly as part of a zero trust strategy as well, where you start to look at the context of that user and then make decisions continuously based off of what actions they're trying to perform on that endpoint, right? And so the endpoint becomes a really critical component of your zero trust contextual awareness type of strategy. Automation, we've talked about it a little bit. So there's the built-in capabilities from the Windows operating system, as well as Apple and Google having their own flavors of that for their operating systems. And then there's the other processes from a lot of the other UEM vendors that Romanis mentioned, the ManageEngine approach here, but also providing another capability to try to automate some of these things that are time intensive, that are very manual, that take up a lot of time, right? So that is a key element of how you modernize. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about this too, which is analytics driven. There is much more of a focus today on understanding the performance of the endpoint and what that user experience is like. And a lot of the UEM players are starting to build that analytics capability directly into their agents, or are providing another baked in product as part of their overall suite that can tell you this information about the overall user experience. So at the end of the day, all of this should help improve the overall user experience while improving manageability and security at the same time. So that's how we view it as Forrester. Obviously, there's a long way to get to this vision for many different companies out there. But this is what we see as kind of the longer term future solution here. And if we look at some of the data here, it strongly suggests that people are moving in this direction. So this is a survey of infrastructure decision makers. And we asked them, how much do they agree or disagree about these statements about Windows 10? We asked them in this specific one. 66% of them said we will manage Windows 10 devices with the same tools that we use to manage mobile devices, getting at that unified concept, right? And that's the #1 response option here. 64% say Windows 10 will help us significantly simplify the way we manage Windows PCs, right? So there is strong consensus, I would say, and these numbers have gone up over the years, that the Windows 10 management component is simplifying and getting it easier to modernize our overall endpoint management strategy going forward. So the data definitely suggests, kind of moving in this modern management direction. So I'll stop there and see if you have any comments before we move on to the next slide, Ramaz.
Sure, Andrew. I should admit that we are also witnessing similar trends here, right? So ManageEngine, we were one of the first vendors to offer MDM within our device management solution way back in 2012, right? So I should say back then, I don't know whether there is a coining of the word UEM. So we kind of, had the traditional management along with that. The modern MDM was provided along with it. So people liked it. Actually, there are more customers who like the approach and have taken that. And we had launched our UEM offering in 2018, and since the last couple of years, we have been working on offering endpoint security capabilities within the UEM solution itself. Yes, as you said, there are a majority of organizations which are moving in this direction of modern management. I agree with you.
Awesome, great. That's good to hear.
Yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
Oh yeah, no worries. So I wanted to talk just briefly about this employee experience concept and what we've published at Forrester. And then I want to get to the management and security thing as well, because I think we have some really great content to share there before we open it up for Q&A. So Forrester has this thing that we call the Employee Experience Index. And basically what it does is it measures overall employee engagement from a scale 0 to 100. And this gets back to why user focus is so important for modern management. And the idea is that if you have a score of 100, you are a purpose worker. You are very engaged in your overall workplace. And so when we looked at what were the drivers that actually improved or decreased the employee experience index score, there were basically 3 major categories. There was empower, which is all about management support and clarity of goals, kind of traditional employee experience components. There's inspiration, which is all about cultural values and mission and feeling like your work matters and has purpose, those types of things. And then the final area, 30% of the overall experience was enablement, which is all technology related factors, right? So if you're out there and you're thinking, oh, how much does endpoint management really impact employee experience? The answer is quite a bit. I mean, 30% of the overall experience is driven through technology. And so endpoint management is going to play a role alongside a lot of other technologies as well. But just to say that you have a lot more power to influence the employee experience than you might think traditionally. And when we look at some of the impact of specific tech on employee experience index scores, you can see some of this power, right? So if an employee says, I have flexibility in choosing the tech I need to use my job, plus 13 points. All of that is enabled through UEM, through management of multiple operating systems, right? Can't do it without UEM. I have the mobile tech I need to do my job, plus 10 points. Obviously, the MDM component of UEM plays a huge role there. I know how to get the tech support I need to keep me productive, plus 10 points. And so this is another big area too, and one that we've called out ManageEngine in some of our research around is remote support capabilities and remote PC access, that type of thing. Being able to figure out, what's wrong with my device when something's happening to it. Easy for me to authenticate to the apps and devices I need, plus 8 points. It's more of an IAM story overall, but it does play a role. There's identity and management are very linked. My devices or apps break often, causing too many disruptions to my work, minus 7 points. So you get this big impact here. That gets back to the desktop analytics components that I was mentioning just a few minutes ago. There is a direct link between these technology investments and what happens with your employee experience, which influences productivity, satisfaction, retention of talent, and ultimately attraction of talent too. So this is a big, major trend that's happening in the industry right now.
Oh yeah, I understand, and I see the statistics moving on that direction. I would like to share something that we are working towards this employee experience. So it's on the intelligent update management by eliminating app crashes and app compatibility related issues. So basically, we are working on enhancing our update management capabilities further to bring down app compatibility issues to near zero, thereby ensuring enhanced end user experience and drastically reducing help desk tickets and calls around such issues. So we are also working on leveraging the endpoint telemetry that is part of our EDR initiative to empower the IT admins to improve end user experience, right? The telemetry data can give you more insights, IT insights for measuring the quality of experience they are delivering to users. So it can help to identify issues and align yourself according to the user experience for the betterment, right? I mean, it is not uncommon for end users to experience long boot times. I'm just saying this as an example. So when you have this telemetry data which is collecting such information, it could be input to the IT admins, so they should be able to understand, analyze, and fix prior to the employee who's going to complain about it. So it's all improving the end user's experience from our point of view, my point of view.
Absolutely. And we had a great example from our customer base where we had a federal government customer come to us and say, you know, we're having issues with logon time. And I said, yeah, how long is the logon time? 20 to 30 minutes every morning, booting up a PC because there's so many security agents on top of it, right? So this is where this starts to get really important. Thinking about this relationship between EX, security, and management, is it can really, you know, that's, you know, think about that. That's basically 2.5 hours a week that you're sitting there waiting for a device to boot up. That's not really what you're hired for. And so that has a big impact on your overall experience. And so what you've outlined, that experience management becomes part of UEM, is definitely a trend that I'm seeing across the industry as well. So let's dive a little bit into some of these different approaches, what we're seeing from the data. We mentioned that we are seeing a management and endpoint security convergence. Absolutely, and you can see it across the different plans for adoption of PC and mobile technologies, right? This is people that are going to adopt things over the next 12 months. You know, they're adopting everything really. Endpoint security, EMM, mobile security, traditional client management, mobile containerization, PC monitoring. UEM is the lowest one. It's you know, it's one of the more emerging forms, which is I think why you see it as one of the lower ones here. But there is, you know, focus on really thinking about all of these different technologies together. And so when we've talked with some clients that have made this transition to security and IT ops, working in lockstep, we tend to see a couple of different benefits. From the security side, it's, you know, faster time to containment, it's improved attack surface management, ability to move towards more of that risk-based security policy. That's very much related to that contextual policy that I mentioned early on here too. So from a security perspective, you know, if you are moving to a more modern management type of framework where I can all of a sudden protect the data wherever it goes and put a bunch of guardrails around that, that is going to be safer for me as a security organization person than a traditional, you know, approach with moat and castle type of VPN approach where I can give full access to a domain network, for instance. From an IT ops perspective, working more with security, you know, it does give you a couple of advantages. The first is really around task prioritization. So figuring out when do I patch, when, what's the best method for that, and also really helping out with the remediation of different security events via patching, right? So IT ops can play a very strong role in security as well by focusing on that patching component. Less impact to UX, right? We talked a little bit about this. You know, if I say I'm going to embrace a combined unified endpoint management and security strategy, a lot of the times what we see with clients is that they end up taking out multiple endpoint security tools that they have in their portfolio. Maybe it's a DLP tool, maybe it's an anti-malware tool, something like that. And because they have it baked into the UEM, or they're using a baked-in, Windows or Mac OS capability, a native functionality, there's less agents on the device, less impact on the overall performance of that as well. And so that experience becomes better. And the more that you're able to leverage those native capabilities, or combine it with a UEM solution and reduce the overall agents, the better impact you have on user experience, which is good for you as an IT ops person. Over half of them today say they're actually goaled on improving employee experience at their organization. So part of your goals and your salary and your promotions and your bonuses as well. So and finally, less downtime too. Being able to do this in an effective way. It's not going to lead to disruptions when it comes to OS updates or third-party patch updates and so forth. So we see a big opportunity here for organizations. And then we see a couple of benefits just with the overall strategy, right? If you're able to kind of bring these two teams together and bring these tools together, you reduce a lot of the friction between those two teams, right? Traditionally, they are at each other's throats. And a lot of times what I hear from IT ops folks is, we want to improve the UX, but security won't approve what we want to do, right? And so that ends up becoming a major element. If you're able to take the tooling itself and stitch it together in such a way that provides that native intrinsic security, it allows you to push forward those UX concepts even more. Stops malware propagations is a big one, right? If I have something managed via UEM, I can stop malware propagation across multiple different operating systems, form factors, between users, etc. Improving visibility through the network, reducing that breach detection time because you have the IT ops perspective in there as well. Data awareness is another big increase that we see traditionally with these when organizations have a combined approach. Exfiltration of toxic data to those that are malicious actors. You can put conditional access policies around particular types of data, for instance, have DLP policies in place that prevent that exfiltration of data. And so that combined approach can help there as well. Reducing, this is another one, capital and operational expenditures on security. It's not just the impact on the UX of having all those security agents, it's also pretty expensive to have that many licenses, particularly if they are more on-prem products and you're managing that in a traditional kind of perpetual licensing. That can be very expensive very quickly. And then we mentioned this, so I won't talk too much, but the security agent fatigue and that impact on UX. I would also say that with so many different security agents, it can often be hard to say, which one do I trust above all the other ones too? And that consistently comes up as a problem for our clients too. So this is good to think about consolidating a lot of these elements together. So awesome. I'll stop there and see what comments you have there, and then we'll do a couple key takeaways and some Q&A and some ManageEngine content too.
Perfect. That would be awesome. I would love that key takeaways as customers. I would like to agree on the security ops versus IT ops. So let me share my thoughts, what we have experienced. Since last couple of years, we have been experiencing pressing need both amongst our customers, obviously in the market, to be able to perform all endpoint related activities, whether management or security, using a single console, right? So experience of same workflow, single agent from a single console. So that's what is expectation. Enterprises are increasingly looking for that kind of approach, right? So a good use case which I could think of is the recent supply chain based attacks, right? So when organizations wants to check for any infiltration or whether they are affected, now they have to depend on the blue teams to get the asset information, where exactly the applications were running, what asset was actually infected, so that they should be able to start that. So this is one example which clearly says that operational, the IT ops and the Sec ops have to go hand in hand. And from our experience, one of the banking BFSI customer, according to the local RBI regulations, they have to have the applications to be controlled with permission management, right? So elevated privilege management. Now, what they already had the unified endpoint management with us, but what they liked it, they want to have the security perspective to be added to it. They should be able to manage it smoothly across the network with the endpoint. So I completely strongly agree with the management and the security converging. And I also look at it as a transaction. See, from the traditional, those who are having traditional way of managing it, they can start exploring a modern way. So that becomes co-management, where they have both these things put together from a single console and slowly transform their network to the UEM. So that's one advantage. I have a question for you based on the experience what we have seen. Now, you see that these IT operations and security operation has to work together. So now, how do you think that this can be achieved? Whether it is by combining the people or putting both the teams together, Blue and Red put together, or defining the process for them, or having appropriate tool. Which way do you think that this security ops and IT ops can be managing endpoints in a better way?
It's a great question. I would say oftentimes it depends on the size of the organization. Enterprise, you tend to see that the IT ops folks and the security ops are, completely separate teams. And so in that case, I see this more as tool consolidation as well as process consolidation, and starting to work together across those areas. When I work more closely with SMB, oftentimes they can be on the same team, the IT and the security folks, or they can even be one person. Sometimes you get the IT champion that wears an IT ops and a security hat at the same time. And so in that case, it's sort of already sort of like pre-integrated. And we do see that quite a bit in the SMB market. For the enterprise, though, I would say some of the major things that we have seen have been more of a movement towards using UEM to enforce native endpoint security policies, like a BitLocker or like a Defender or something like that, and using that as kind of your primary protection versus the third-party tools. So that's been one of the first areas that we've seen that move away from the third-party tools, and more of an embrace of UEM acting with the native capabilities of the operating system. And from a process perspective, a lot of this comes down to a lot of the processes that we see around Agile and DevOps, and working more closely in kind of product-centric teams to deliver that experience. We talk a lot about experience as a product as well, and so the employee experience, that is a technology component of that. And so the way that you fundamentally work as an organization is much more iterative, much more UX based, much more research oriented, and so forth, and feedback collection oriented. So I think from a process perspective, that's one of the major changes and difficulties, challenges for these organizations to come together, is that they're really not used to that type of working together. And so I think that'll be one of the big areas, is that process procedural change around how do we manage this. But yeah, it's definitely different across the different sizes of organizations.
Awesome. Fantastic. So you want to, I'm excited to see your takeaways.
Yeah, so a couple key takeaways. I'll keep this brief, and then I think you'll have some final thoughts around us, and then we'll open it up for Q&A here. So just a couple of key takeaways. A lot of this is coming down the pipeline, right? This is more future-leaning stuff. There's starting to be some movement, but here are some things that you can start to think about doing right now that you can take as actionable takeaways from this call. So one is taking the inventory of your existing management and security tools. And one, I would say, see where there's overlap between them. some of these management tools are going to have things like EDR or anti-malware capabilities built into them, identity and access management capabilities built into them. And so, understanding where those overlaps are can help you get a better sense of, okay, where could I cut costs in certain areas, get a little bit of extra value here as well. And then also seeing what security third-party tools you're using that could have native alternatives, like a BitLocker, like a Defender, those types of things. Identify the use cases for management and security monetization based on app usage and location. Oftentimes we find with modern management, where people start are the remote workers, which is kind of everyone right now, but maybe think about your overall, who are your long-term remote workers, your heavy sales travelers, your BYOD users. Those people can often be very good, especially if they're using a very lightweight application portfolio. In other words, they're not using Win32 or anything like that, or they are just kind of using the Office suite or the Google suite or whatever you might have deployed for a productivity suite. And so, those types of things, looking at application usage and as well as their location can help you identify, okay, where do I start? Where's a good use case to begin with some of this modernization? We talk about this concept of employee journey mapping. And basically what that is doing in-depth interviews with folks to see across their day, what is their experience like and what barriers do they actually come up against, right? And that journey mapping process can help you identify what are those things that you need to improve, what should that experience look like going forward? And we've seen this a lot with end user computing teams, delving in and try to understand that experience even more. And so, look up this concept of journey mapping. You can always reach out. We do a lot of this at Forrester as well. We can help you with it. Craft a plan for app modernization and GPO rationalization now. These are the two biggest, hardest things about modern management transition. Is that you have these legacy applications that you got to decide, do I want to buy a new off the shelf? Do I want to virtualize? Do I want to refactor it so it runs in a web format, that type of thing. So that often takes a couple of years to kind of go down this path of doing this consistently, especially if you're a large company. GPO rationalization is the other one too, because especially with Windows, when you're moving from GPOs to configuration service providers, you need to understand which ones you're using, which ones you aren't, and which ones you're going to bring to the future. So that can be really important. So getting that inventory up front is going to be key. And then we often say, if you have a capability to deploy some analytics now, it's great to do that because it gives you a sense of where you could start. Maybe it's, use it to identify those users that have the lightweight application requirements, for instance. So analytics can be used at the end, as kind of a final, most mature stage, but they can also be used upfront to help you get started too. So those are 5 key takeaways. I hope that's helpful for you. Ramon, it's over to you for some closing thoughts, and then we'll open it up.
Wow, those 5 takeaways are really thoughtful, and I think that's going to be really a transformative moving towards the UEM. Thanks for that, Andrew. And so I'm going to call upon Meera to check the questions what we have got so far. And so while we are waiting for her to join and list the questions, so Desktop Central UEM, as you have mentioned, as long we have been discussing in the conversation. So UEM should have approach to do a better data provisioning, managed applications, and have compliances. And as you have rightly put, the analytics part is something where it don't have to be at the end. It can also be at the start to give you more visibility and where you can start defining or refining your process and the end user experience. So I completely understand and agree and appreciate the points, the 5 takeaways. And let's have Meera to discuss the questions. Meera, over to you.
Thank you, Romanis. So as we move into our Q&A, I would like to remind our audience to please submit your questions within the webinar interface. And we already seem to have a couple of questions in queue. Thank you for the active participation. I'll start with the first one, and it's a rather interesting one. I request Andrew to take it. In our company, IT security gets prioritized over IT operations. Do you see this changing in the near future?
A great
Andrew,
question. Yes, I think this is common in pretty much every organization that I talk to. And so I still see it as being the #1 priority going forward. I mean, if you don't have it, the rest of the business is in jeopardy, right? It completely jeopardizes your overall brand, your ability to work with customers, the trust that people place in you. And so I think security is always going to be prioritized, but we have been seeing this rising tide of employee experience and the importance of ensuring that that experience is really good. And that has never been more clear than in the past year with people working at home, with the pandemic and so forth. And so I think that they're becoming closer into balance. I still feel that that IT ops, the way to kind of get this through is to continue to talk in a language that security pros will understand. Reduction of attack surface through new modern, IT operations approaches and so forth. That's going to help your case to be more prioritized, especially if you start to take on more of the endpoint security technologies and processes yourself, you're in a better position to kind of lead that overall. So I do see security as still being kind of #1, and I foresee that. It's been like that for so many years. But your ability to influence this discussion is certainly growing. So I see it becoming closer to parity.
Thank you, Andrew, for the answer. So the next one says, we hear a lot about zero trust these days. How does that help with remote working, and how can we go about implementing the same in our organization? Would you like to take that one as well?
Sure, yes, I'll take the zero trust one, since Forrester's very big on the zero trust
Yeah.
terminology and so forth. So yeah, we see it as a major component of it. And particularly when you think about zero trust, it's one of a focus on data, right? Protecting data wherever it is. It's a focus on continuously authenticating to that data and always verifying when people are trying to make a particular action. And it's also looking across a variety of different conditions: device compliance, application health, network risk, user authentication. All of these things are really important. And I would say in a remote work situation, zero trust becomes even more important. One, because the person's on a network that you don't really know if that network is secure, right? You can give some guidelines around protection of home networks, but you don't really know. You don't really know, unless you have good telemetry data, whether the endpoint is trusted and compliant. And so it becomes an even more important thing for people to access the information that they need in a remote environment, is to be able to have that that visibility across the device, the app, the network, the user identity, etc., as you go and support that remote workforce. And we've definitely seen increase in zero trust and looking at replacements for VPNs and so forth as a result of the pandemic, looking to more of a cloud-enabled, we call zero trust network access. You might hear it as called a SASE out there as well. That type of functionality becomes super important for, one, giving people access to stuff they need, but also making sure they can do it in a secure way. So I think zero trust is, one, the future of how we secure remote workers, and also the future of how we make sure they have a better security experience in that remote work environment.
Yeah. So Meera, I would like to add a point. I mean, my view, what Andrew has said. So I look at it kind of more philosophy, right? Zero trust network access is not with cloud and the application or the person. It's also about the endpoint, where I feel like if any privileged operation is done on endpoint, so that can be installation of critical applications, patches, things like that, or doing an operation or running a script on a high-value asset. Now, if that is the case, it has to be multi-factor authenticated, because it's affecting the asset in real time. So that way, the zero trust philosophy has to be implemented across the endpoints. So where we should get more control, more visibility, more secured, so that the business could continue in a perfect condition. Over to you, Mira.
Sure. Thanks, Romanis. I think we have questions pouring in, so let's see how we can take them. So the next one says, majority of our enterprise mobility users do not want their devices big brothered and managed by the company. They need access to apps that actually boost their productivity. Is mobile app management today sufficient, and is it fully embraced by IT security teams today? What are the long-term impacts of remote working that's happening in this particular segment? Andrew, would you like to take that?
Great question. And definitely we see increases in MAM as a particular way of granting access. One, for the privacy reason, but also two, if you are, what we call the extended enterprise, you're hiring contractors, gig workers, etc. They might be working for multiple different companies, and so getting them enrolled in an MDM is just not going to work. Functionally, the technology doesn't work that way. So we are seeing increase in MAM capabilities overall. I wod say that it's not fully trusted from security pros. And it continues to grow in its overall maturity and provide more functionality for doing things like application expirations and restricting copy and paste and doing authentication timeouts and so forth on applications. But I would say that the prevailing notion is that having a combination of MAM and MDM is the most secure approach. Not to say that's not going to be the future of it. Certainly a MAM only approach makes it a lot easier to manage just the application and not have to manage the device, and is also going to be less costly in the long term. So I think long term what you'll see is MAM will continue to grow and mature and get more deployments compared to MDM, but right now I say MDM is definitely the dominant approach, and some do both MDM and MAM at the same time. So I'm hopeful for the future of MAM, but I do think it needs even more growth over time and maturation.
Sure. Thank you, Andrew. So the next question says, we want to adopt UEM in our organization. What should be our approach to migrating or adopting UEM? Romanis, would you like to take that one?
Oh yeah, sure. So I would like to start from what Andrew has given us a takeaway. So the first thing what he mentioned in the takeaway is basically take an inventory of your existing management and security tools. Any organization which is managing endpoint would have this, a tool for management or a tool for security. Now, looking at that, you should have a clear idea that you should combine these put together, because that is how the entire industry is moving. People want to have the convergence of endpoint management and endpoint security from a single console, single agent, single workflow. And during this pandemic, we have seen that people who had ported their applications or people who have moved to cloud had better edge than people who struggled to bring in their homegrown application, customer-facing application through the VPN, and had so many challenges in terms of security, and then moving it to cloud, right? So that way, having an inventory of your security and management tools for the endpoint, and then ensure that what are the features that it offers, whether it is in trend with the current requirements. Basically, what we have been discussing so far, right from provisioning, reprovisioning, managing, remote management, right? Continuous update of the patches, continuous vulnerability management, data leak prevention, device compliance, and analytics. All this put together, if the tool is able to provide from a single flow, single agent, and single console, that is where you move towards that direction of unified endpoint management.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure, Romanus. Thank you. So I think we'll have time for one more question. So it's again specific to Desktop Central. So it says, can Desktop Central UEM help me detect unmanaged or expected computers on my local area network? And if so, how does that work?
Yeah. So Desktop Central, can you repeat the question again? Sorry.
Yeah, sure. So it asks, can Desktop Central detect unmanaged or expected computers within my LAN? And if so, how does that work?
Yeah, so basically the discovery of the endpoints here, it is from Active Directory. So when you have that added to the network, the agent is automatically going to get installed on that, and from there you should be able to manage them. And so in the conditions like as I was explaining, exodus of endpoints from the closed perimeter to outside work from home, and from there coming back to office, these things could be tracked. It is more of the agent which is able to be report, and the server would track this and should be able to manage it from anywhere.
Sure. Got it, Romanus. Thank you. Can we quickly take one more, if possible? I think it is a rather interesting one. Andrew, if you can quickly take that one. What are the long-term impacts of remote working, and how can an SMB go about implementing security within their enterprise?
Yeah, so I think
The
long
second
term,
portion, if possible.
yeah, sure, yeah. Long term, I mean, there are a whole bunch of cultural, societal, long-term implications of this that we've been talking about in a lot of our research, but I won't cover that specifically. But as far as the IT department goes, what I think is going to happen is this long-term resurgence of what we call adaptive mobility. My ability to have a mobile experience that travels with me regardless of where I am. And so I think long-term what happens is that we move to a place where we stop thinking about the data as being protected inside of a data center, and we start thinking about it as traveling and having to be protected in all of these different sort of environments going forward. So I think overall, and revamping that mobility strategy is going to be one of the key things that comes out of this, where there's not going to be a difference between your experience at work versus your experience at home versus your experience at the Starbucks coffee shop while you're working there on a random day, those types of things. And so that, I think, that long-term focus on experience anywhere becomes really important. And as part of the security component, I see more and more focus on one, endpoint management taking on some of that endpoint security. I think we'll see IT ops teams have more of a security hat long-term. And I would also not be surprised to see a lot of the third-party security agents that are out there begin to become even more subsumed into Windows, into Mac OS, and to be much more reliant on native security functionality in the future than we are today. So I think those are two of the main things that we'll see, in addition to what we call this anywhere mobility strategy.
Thanks a lot, Andrew. Thank you very much. And that brings us to the end of the discussion today. It was such a wonderful session. I would like to thank our experts, Andrew and Romanus, for this very informative session, and also thank our audience today for their active participation. Please visit ManageEngine.com/EMS for more information on our unified endpoint management and security offerings. We hope you have a wonderful day ahead. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.